A whisper that broke his curse. The cowboy's redemption begins. Jack had always been a man of few words. On the vast stretches of his family's ranch, he found solace in the wind rustling through the tall grasses, the steady rhythm of horses' hooves, and the quiet sunrise that painted the sky every morning. Life, for most people, was a series of conversations, laughter, and connections. But for Jack, it was work, solitude, and the lingering weight of a past he could never seem to escape. The townsfolk knew him as the quiet cowboy who kept to himself, the man with a face weathered by years of sun and wind, with eyes that seemed to see more than he let on. Children avoided staring too long at him, sensing an unspoken sadness in his silence. Adults spoke in hushed tones about the curse that followed Jack, though no one could say exactly what it was. People whispered that misfortune clung to him, that tragedy always seemed to find him, and that anyone who got too close eventually left or suffered somehow. Jack never paid attention to these whispers. He believed in hard work, in honesty, and in living life without expecting favors from the world. He did not believe in curses, yet the weight of his solitude often felt heavier than any magic could make it. Every morning Jack woke before dawn. He would saddle his horse, ride across the sprawling fields, and check on the livestock. The routine was comforting, it was predictable, it was safe. He had learned over the years that safety came in keeping others at a distance. Friends came and went. Lovers tried to reach him, only to meet walls built from old pain and mistrust. Family members were gone, either by choice or by circumstance, leaving him to face the harsh reality of life alone. It was on one of these early mornings, when the fog still lingered low over the ground and the horses nickered softly, that something unusual happened. Jack had been checking the north pasture when he noticed a commotion near the fence line. A young colt had gotten tangled in the ropes, panicking, thrashing its legs, and cutting itself on the rough twine. Jack approached carefully, speaking in low, soothing tones, though the animal could not understand words. His hands were steady, his movements precise. He worked quickly, freeing the frightened colt, cleaning its wounds, and whispering a silent apology to the creature for the scare it had suffered. Even in these moments, Jack felt a hollow ache inside him. Saving the animals brought him comfort, yes, but it reminded him of what he could not save: people. Friends who had turned away in times of need, lovers who had left because he could not open his heart, and the small tragedies that had struck him one after another, leaving scars no one could see. He had once tried to fight against it, tried to build a life where love and companionship mattered, but the pain of loss was always too heavy, too real, and he withdrew. The world, he decided, was easier to face alone. That evening, after tending to the ranch, Jack sat by the fire inside his small cabin. The flames flickered, casting dancing shadows on the wooden walls. He poured himself a cup of coffee, black, strong, and bitter. The silence was thick, comforting yet suffocating, filled only by the occasional crackle of burning wood. He thought about the day, the colt, and the simple satisfaction of a job done well. Yet even satisfaction carried an undercurrent of sorrow. For all his hard work, for all his quiet diligence, he remained bound by memories and fears, prisoners of events he could neither change nor forget. As he prepared for bed, a sound made him pause. It was faint, almost imperceptible, a whisper carried by the wind, brushing against the edges of the cabin's open window. Jack froze, listening, trying to determine whether it was his imagination or something else. "It's time to let go," the voice seemed to say, soft and gentle, almost like a breeze, almost like a secret shared only with him. Jack frowned. He was a rational man. He didn't believe in spirits or magic or anything beyond what he could touch, see, and prove. Yet for reasons he could not explain, the words made his heart quicken. It was as if something deep inside him had recognized the sound, a voice that belonged neither to the living nor to the imagined, but to some truth he had long avoided. He shook his head and dismissed it, blaming the wind, the crackling fire, or fatigue. Still, sleep that night was elusive. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the whisper settle in his chest, lingering longer than he wanted it to. Days passed, and Jack tried to push the memory aside. Life on the ranch demanded attention, and there were always chores, always animals to care for, fences to mend, and fields to inspect. Yet every so often the whisper returned, unbidden in the quiet moments, while mending a fence, feeding the livestock, or riding alone through the wide-open plains. "It's time to let go," it murmured, and each time the words carried a strange weight, as if the universe itself was urging him to change, to take a step he had long avoided. Despite his reservations, Jack began to notice subtle shifts within himself. He felt a growing curiosity, a softening in his defenses. Perhaps it was age, perhaps it was exhaustion from years of solitude, or perhaps it was the whisper that had lodged itself inside him like a seed. He started to watch the world with new eyes, noticing the laughter of children in town, the kindness of neighbors helping one another, and even the tender moments shared between strangers. These glimpses of connection, simple and fleeting, tugged at his heart. They reminded him of what he had lost, yes, but also of what he had the potential to regain. One afternoon, Jack rode into town to collect supplies. He passed familiar faces, exchanged brief greetings, and noted the small changes in the town since he had last been there. A child waved at him, and he waved back, a small gesture he had not made in years. In that instant, he felt a flicker of warmth he thought long extinguished. The whisper came again, softer this time, almost playful, almost encouraging. "It's time," it said, and Jack found himself staring into the horizon, imagining what life might be like if he could finally shed the weight of his past. That evening, back on the ranch, he sat outside his cabin as the sun dipped below the distant hills. The sky was a brilliant mix of orange, pink, and violet, reflecting on the quiet waters of the small creek that ran through his property. Jack felt a strange sense of anticipation, a quiet stirring in his chest he could not name. Perhaps it was fear, perhaps hope, or perhaps something entirely new. The whisper had done something no one else could. It had made him consider the impossible, that he might not be cursed, that he might be capable of change, that he might be able to reach out and embrace life again. As night fell, Jack made a decision. He would not act rashly. He would not chase a phantom voice blindly, but he would pay attention. He would observe, listen, and be open to the small signs life offered him. Perhaps this was the beginning of something he had long feared, something called redemption. The wind picked up, carrying with it the distant sound of hooves and the soft rustling of the grasses. And then, just as he was about to retreat inside, the whisper came one last time that night, clearer than ever. "It's time to let go, Jack. Your life begins again." For the first time in years, Jack did not feel the weight of the past pressing down on him. Instead, he felt something light, fragile, and electric, a possibility. He did not know what tomorrow would bring, who he would meet, or how his life might change. But for the first time, he believed that change was possible. The curse that had defined him for so long, whether real or imagined, seemed less powerful than the whisper that promised a new beginning. And in the quiet of the ranch, under a sky full of stars, Jack whispered back, not to the wind, not to the voice, but to himself, "I'm ready." From that night onward, something had shifted. Even the animals seemed to notice it. The colt in the north pasture followed him more willingly, the horses nickered with a new sense of ease, and the wind itself seemed less harsh. Jack did not yet know what lay ahead. He only knew that for the first time in a long time, he had taken the smallest, most important step toward freedom. The step of acknowledging that the past, no matter how heavy, did not have to define his future. And so began the quiet, unspoken start of Jack's journey, a journey that would test his courage, his heart, and the very limits of the man he had become. Days passed on the ranch, and Jack could not shake the whisper from his mind. Though he continued his routine of tending to the fields, checking on the livestock, and maintaining the fences, a subtle curiosity had taken root inside him. The voice, soft yet insistent, had opened a door in his heart that he had long kept closed. For years he had trusted only himself, but now he wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was room for something, or someone else. It was during one of these quiet mornings that Clara arrived in town. She was not the type of person who demanded attention. With a calm presence and kind eyes, she moved with a natural ease that drew people to her without effort. Clara was a traveling healer, known in the region for her knowledge of herbs, remedies, and the subtle ways of helping people who had been through hardship. Unlike the townsfolk who whispered about Jack's curse, Clara noticed him without judgment. She saw a man weighed down by invisible burdens, someone who had lived through pain yet retained a spark of resilience. Jack first noticed her one afternoon when he went into town to restock supplies. She was tending to an elderly man who had injured his hand, carefully cleaning and bandaging the wound while speaking in gentle, soothing tones. The townsfolk watched in admiration, and even Jack found himself lingering at the edge of the store, his curiosity piqued. There was something about Clara that made him uneasy, in the way that sunlight can be both warm and blinding at the same time. He did not trust people easily, and yet he could not look away. Their first real interaction happened unexpectedly. Jack had returned to the ranch after collecting supplies when one of the horses spooked and twisted its leg. He rushed to the animal, knowing that without proper care the injury could become serious. Frustration and concern filled him as he examined the leg, trying to calm the horse with quiet words. Just then, Clara appeared, having heard about the accident from the town. She approached without hesitation, kneeling beside the horse and offering her assistance. Jack bristled at first. He had spent years doing everything alone, and the idea of someone stepping in felt almost intrusive. But Clara did not argue or question him. She worked methodically, showing him how to apply a proper bandage and how to tend to the swelling. Her hands were gentle but confident, and Jack found himself silently impressed. When she looked at him, there was no judgment, no pity, only understanding. As the day went on, Jack realized that Clara's presence had stirred something within him that he had not felt in years, a sense of possibility. He found himself listening to her explanations, asking questions, and even laughing quietly at her small jokes. It was strange, almost disorienting, to feel a connection without fear or suspicion. The whisper that had haunted him nights ago seemed to echo in this moment, soft but undeniable. It's time to let go. Over the next several days, Clara became a steady presence on the ranch. She helped with the animals, guided Jack in new methods of caring for the crops, and taught him a few remedies that he could use in emergencies. Jack found that he looked forward to her visits, though he would never admit it aloud. He still carried the weight of years of isolation, the scars of losses that had left him wary, but Clara's quiet encouragement chipped away at the walls he had built. Their conversations were simple at first, how to treat a minor cut, how to calm a frightened horse, but gradually they began to touch deeper subjects. Clara asked him about the ranch, his family, and his past. Jack answered cautiously, careful not to reveal too much, yet he could feel a release in speaking aloud what he had carried silently for years. There was comfort in her listening, in her gentle questions, and in the absence of judgment. He found himself beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was not as alone as he had thought. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet, Jack and Clara sat on a fallen log, watching the horses graze in the fading light. The air was warm, carrying the scent of fresh hay and wildflowers. For a long moment, neither spoke, and Jack realized that silence no longer felt heavy. It was peaceful, companionable. He glanced at Clara, noticing the way her hair caught the last rays of sunlight. And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to imagine a life that included someone else, a life that did not revolve solely around work and solitude. But change is never easy, and Jack struggled with the tension between hope and fear. He had been hurt too many times, seen too many people leave, and lost too much to believe that happiness could last. Every time he felt drawn to Clara, a shadow of doubt crept in. What if he allowed himself to care only to be left behind once again? These thoughts haunted him, whispering that solitude was safer than risk. Yet the more he resisted, the more he realized that his old way of life had only kept him trapped in a cycle of loneliness. A turning point came when a neighbor's child became seriously ill. The family had no one to help them, and Clara's skills were urgently needed. Jack hesitated at first, torn between his instinct to retreat and the growing awareness that he could make a difference. He mounted his horse and rode with Clara to the child's home. Over the next several hours, he assisted in preparing remedies, calming the child, and providing practical support. For the first time, Jack felt the rush of helping someone beyond the ranch. Not animals, not crops, but a human being whose life depended in part on his actions. That night, as they rode back to the ranch under a sky strewn with stars, Jack found himself speaking quietly to Clara, sharing details of his past that he had never told anyone. He spoke of his family, the losses that had shaped him, and the fear that had kept him isolated for so long. Clara listened without interruption, offering only a gentle nod or a comforting word. Her presence was steady, a light that did not demand but invited. When he finished, Jack felt lighter, as if the act of speaking had lifted a burden he did not realize he carried. The following days brought more challenges. Jack began noticing old patterns in his behavior, the way he avoided connection, the way he bristled at help, the way he retreated when things became difficult. Clara helped him recognize these patterns, not with criticism but with encouragement. She showed him that courage was not the absence of fear but the willingness to act despite it. She reminded him that redemption and change were possible, even for someone who believed themselves cursed. Through small acts, Jack started to change. He helped neighbors with their chores without expecting anything in return. He repaired fences that had long been neglected, not for work's sake, but to restore trust and connection with the community. He spent more time with the animals, learning to read their moods, anticipate their needs, and care for them with a patience he had not known before. Each day brought small victories, and with each victory, Jack felt a sense of pride and hope that had been absent from his life for years. Yet, life never lets a man change without testing him. One afternoon, Jack received word that an old friend, someone he had not seen in years, was in danger. The situation demanded immediate action, and Jack knew that ignoring it could have dire consequences. His instinct to stay isolated clashed with the emerging sense of responsibility and courage he had begun to cultivate. He hesitated, feeling the familiar tug of fear, the whisper of the old curse in the back of his mind. But then he remembered Clara's words, "Courage is acting even when you are afraid." Jack mounted his horse and set out toward the danger, his heart pounding but his resolve firm. Clara rode with him, guiding him and offering reassurance along the way. The ride was tense, each mile bringing new challenges, and yet Jack felt a clarity he had never experienced. The fear that had defined him for so long no longer held him in place. He was no longer running from the world, he was stepping into it. When they finally reached his friend, Jack's training, strength, and growing confidence were put to the test. The situation was critical, and Jack's actions, calm, precise, and courageous, helped avert disaster. His friend was safe thanks to Jack's willingness to act despite fear. In that moment, Jack realized that the curse that had haunted him was never about bad luck or misfortune. It was about his own choices, his retreat into solitude, his refusal to trust, and his fear of loss. By stepping forward, by choosing action over fear, he was breaking the pattern that had controlled him for so long. As they rode back to the ranch, the sun setting behind them, Jack felt a sense of accomplishment and relief. He was not yet free from the weight of the past, but he had taken a decisive step toward redemption. The whisper that had stirred him days ago now seemed less like a ghost and more like a voice of truth, an encouragement to embrace life fully, to trust, to act, and to care. That night, sitting outside his cabin with Clara beside him, Jack finally allowed himself to rest not only in body but in spirit. He watched the stars, felt the cool breeze, and let the silence be a companion rather than a reminder of loneliness. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges yet unseen, but Jack knew that he was no longer bound by fear. He had the courage to face whatever came next, guided by the small, steady presence of someone who believed in him and by the whisper that had dared him to begin again. And so, the quiet transformation continued. Jack was not yet fully healed, and he did not yet know the full story of his life ahead, but the seed of change had been planted. He had begun to listen, to act, and to believe. The whisper had done its work, not by magic, but by awakening a heart that had been closed for far too long. The days on the ranch became filled with new energy. Jack and Clara worked side by side, facing challenges and joys alike. Their partnership was built on trust, patience, and mutual respect. Jack began to understand that redemption was not a single event but a continuous journey, a series of choices made with courage, kindness, and honesty. And for the first time in a long time, he looked forward to what tomorrow might bring. Jack had begun to feel a change within himself, a quiet strength that had been dormant for years. The whisper that first reached him on a lonely night seemed to echo in every step he took, every decision he made. Yet, change was never simple, and the past has a way of returning, testing a man just as he begins to feel alive again. It started with a letter delivered by a writer from a neighboring town. The handwriting was familiar, trembling slightly, betraying fear. Jack's old friend, a man named Thomas, was in trouble. Thomas had gotten caught in a dangerous dispute over land and debts, and his life was at risk. Jack felt the familiar pull of responsibility, the weight of someone depending on him, and for the first time he did not hesitate. He saddled his horse, preparing for the journey, and Clara joined him without question. She had become a constant presence, a steady hand at his side, and Jack realized he had begun to trust her completely. The ride was long and difficult. The terrain was rough, the sun relentless, and the wind carried sharp, biting gusts. But Jack felt a determination he had never known before. This was not just about helping Thomas, it was about proving to himself that he could face fear and act despite it. On the second day of travel, they encountered signs that trouble was close. Cattle had been scattered, fences broken, and tracks showed the movement of several men who did not belong in the area. Jack's instincts sharpened. He studied the tracks, assessed the surroundings, and prepared for confrontation. Clara remained calm beside him, guiding his focus and reminding him that fear was only dangerous when it controlled action. When they finally reached Thomas's property, the situation was worse than Jack had imagined. Men had surrounded the ranch, their intentions clearly hostile. Thomas had barricaded himself in the house, but there was no guarantee they could hold out until help arrived. Jack assessed the scene, formulating a plan with Clara's input. They would need to act quickly, using both strategy and courage. Jack approached the group cautiously, his presence commanding yet controlled. He spoke with authority, his voice steady despite the tension. Some of the men laughed, underestimating the quiet cowboy who had always avoided confrontation. But Jack was not the same man they had imagined. He was no longer a recluse weighed down by past failures. He was a man who had begun to understand his strength and his purpose. A tense standoff ensued. Jack and Clara moved with precision, distracting and disarming the intruders while guiding Thomas to safety. The men were taken aback by Jack's calm confidence, and his strategy, combined with Clara's knowledge of the terrain and timing, allowed them to avoid serious injury. When the dust settled, Thomas was safe, and the intruders had retreated, humiliated and defeated. In the quiet aftermath, Thomas looked at Jack with awe and gratitude. "I didn't think anyone could help me," he admitted. "But you changed everything." Jack nodded, not out of pride, but with a quiet understanding that action, not words, was the measure of a man. The ride back to the ranch was reflective and peaceful. Jack thought about the events that had just unfolded. The danger had been real and the fear had been tangible, yet he had faced it without retreating. He realized that the curse that had haunted him for years was never a supernatural force. It had been fear, isolation, and the belief that he could not protect those he cared about. By confronting danger and stepping forward, he had begun to break that cycle. Clara noticed the change as well. "You handled yourself well," she said softly. "Not because you're fearless, but because you chose to act despite fear. That is courage, Jack, and it is more powerful than any curse." Her words resonated with him. For so long, he had believed himself powerless, yet he had been shaping his own destiny all along. The next few weeks on the ranch were transformative. Jack began to see the world differently, noticing the small acts of kindness and connection around him. He helped neighbors with their chores, repaired old fences without expectation, and tended to the animals with renewed care. Each action was a step away from the solitude that had defined him for so long. Yet the journey was not without emotional challenges. Jack had to confront memories he had long avoided, the loss of loved ones, the mistakes that had led to isolation, and the regrets that weighed heavily on his conscience. Clara's presence was invaluable during these moments. She did not push or demand. She listened, offered guidance, and allowed Jack to process his emotions at his own pace. Her support was steady, a reminder that redemption was not a solitary path but one that could be shared. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, Jack found himself standing on a hill overlooking the ranch. The sky was painted in shades of gold and violet, reflecting in the creek below. He felt a sense of peace that had been foreign to him for years. The fear and doubt that had once dominated his life seemed distant, replaced by a growing sense of purpose and connection. But life, as Jack had learned, always tests resolve. A storm rolled in that night, fierce and unrelenting. The winds howled, the rain poured in torrents, and the livestock grew restless. Jack and Clara worked tirelessly through the night, securing animals, reinforcing structures, and keeping the ranch safe. The storm was a reminder that challenges would always come, but Jack felt prepared in a way he had never been before. He faced the storm not with fear, but with determination and skill, knowing that he could endure whatever life threw at him. The following morning, the ranch was battered but intact. Jack walked among the animals, checking for injuries and ensuring that everything was in order. He realized that the storm, like life's challenges, had tested him and strengthened him. Each obstacle he overcame, each act of courage and compassion, reinforced the belief that the curse of his past was not a sentence but a lesson. It was during a quiet moment after the storm that Jack received news of another neighbor in trouble, a family whose barn had caught fire in the night. Without hesitation, he mounted his horse and rode with Clara to assist. The fire was dangerous, the smoke thick, and the heat intense, but Jack's experience and calm presence guided the rescue. He coordinated the efforts, helping the family save their animals and salvage what they could. After the fire was contained, the family expressed their gratitude. They spoke of Jack not just as a cowboy, but as a man who had made a difference in their lives. For the first time, Jack realized that his actions could have a lasting impact on others. He was no longer defined by loss and isolation. He was defined by courage, compassion, and the choices he made each day. Back at the ranch, Jack and Clara sat by the fire, reflecting on the events of the past weeks. Jack felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the safety of others, but for the transformation within himself. He had faced fear, embraced responsibility, and discovered a capacity for connection and love that he had long denied. The whisper that had reached him in solitude had set him on a path, but it was his own courage and choices that had carried him forward. As night fell, Jack thought about the journey ahead. The challenges he had faced were only the beginning. Life would continue to test him, present new obstacles, and demand courage and resilience. But Jack no longer feared the future. He had learned that redemption was possible, that the past did not have to define him, and that the power to change was always within his grasp. Clara's presence beside him was a constant reminder that he was not alone. She had helped him see the strength within himself, and together they had faced danger, uncertainty, and fear. The bond they shared was built on trust, respect, and shared experience, a foundation that would support them through whatever came next. Jack understood that the curse he had feared for so long was never real in the way the townsfolk imagined. It was a combination of fear, grief, and isolation that had shaped his life. By confronting those feelings, taking action, and allowing himself to trust and connect, he had begun to break free. The whisper that had reached him was not magic, but a symbol of possibility, a reminder that change begins with a single choice. As he lay in bed that night, Jack reflected on how far he had come. The road ahead would not be easy, and he knew there would be moments of doubt and struggle. But he also knew that he had the strength to face them. He had discovered courage, compassion, and the capacity to love and connect once more. The journey of redemption was ongoing, but for the first time he felt truly alive, ready to embrace life fully and without fear. The whisper had been the spark, but Jack's actions had become the flame. Through courage, compassion, and the guidance of a steady friend, he was transforming from a man haunted by loss into a man capable of hope, connection, and lasting impact. The storm, the fires, the dangers, all of it had tested him, and all of it had proven that he could rise above his past. And so, as the ranch settled into quiet night, Jack knew that the next chapter of his life was beginning. He had faced the reckoning, confronted fear, and taken steps toward redemption. The curse that had defined him for so long had been broken, not by magic, but by choice, courage, and the unwavering presence of someone who believed in him. The morning air on the ranch was crisp, carrying the scent of dew-soaked grass and distant pine. Jack awoke with a sense of purpose he had not felt for years. The events of the past weeks, the danger, the courage, the small victories, had transformed him. He was no longer the man who retreated from life in fear. He was ready to face whatever the day would bring, knowing that every choice he made could shape a better future, not only for himself but for those around him. Clara had already begun her morning chores when Jack stepped outside. The horses were calm, grazing quietly, and the sun cast long golden rays across the fields. He watched her for a moment, taking in the simplicity and strength in her actions. She moved with quiet confidence, helping the animals, organizing supplies, and speaking to the ranch hands with patience and kindness. Jack realized that in her presence, he had found more than companionship. He had found guidance, encouragement, and a mirror reflecting the man he could become. A sense of calm settled over him, but it was quickly interrupted by the sound of a distant shout. Jack's heart tightened, and without hesitation, he mounted his horse and rode toward the source. Clara followed close behind, a steady hand at his side. They reached a small clearing near the edge of the property where a fire had broken out in a storage shed. Smoke and flames rose quickly, threatening to spread to the nearby barns and fields. Panic was not an option. Lives, both human and animal, were at stake. Jack sprang into action, his training and experience guiding him. He coordinated the ranch hands, ensuring that the animals were safely moved, and began to tackle the flames with buckets and hoses. Clara worked alongside him, calmly directing efforts, treating burns, and keeping spirits high. The fire was fierce and the heat was intense, but Jack no longer felt fear. He felt focus, determination, and a sense of connection to those around him. Every command, every action, every step he took was measured and purposeful. Hours passed, and finally the flames were under control. The shed had been damaged, but nothing valuable was lost. The townsfolk who had gathered watched in awe as Jack, covered in soot and sweat, calmly checked on the animals and reassured the family affected by the fire. Clara approached him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You did well," she said softly. "You faced fear and acted. That is how change happens." Jack nodded, understanding that this moment was not just about the fire. It was a symbol of his journey, the culmination of courage, selflessness, and the willingness to embrace life fully. In the days that followed, Jack continued to rebuild, repair, and reconnect. He spent long hours on the ranch, but now his work had a deeper meaning. Every fence mended, every animal cared for, and every neighbor helped was a step in his ongoing journey of redemption. He had discovered that the curse he had believed in for so long was not a matter of fate or magic, but the result of fear, isolation, and choices made in the past. By facing his fears and taking responsibility, he was finally free. The emotional weight he had carried for years began to lift. Jack allowed himself to remember the loved ones he had lost, not with sorrow or bitterness, but with gratitude for the lessons they had given him. He forgave himself for past mistakes, understanding that redemption was not about erasing the past, but learning from it and moving forward. Clara remained at his side, a steady presence, her faith in him unwavering. Together they faced each day with purpose, finding joy in the simple moments of life, the laughter of children, the quiet companionship of animals, and the satisfaction of work done well. One afternoon, Jack decided to revisit a place from his past. It was an old barn on the far edge of the ranch, where he had once tried and failed at many things. As he entered, memories surfaced, failures, losses, and moments of self-doubt, but he faced them without fear. He walked through the space with Clara beside him, recognizing the past not as a chain, but as a foundation upon which he could build. Together, they cleaned, repaired, and restored the barn, transforming it into a place of productivity and hope. In that act, Jack realized that redemption was not a single event, but a continuous process, built through dedication, courage, and care. Word of Jack's transformation spread throughout the town. Neighbors who had once whispered about the cursed cowboy now sought his guidance, his help, and his friendship. Jack welcomed them with open arms, offering assistance, advice, and compassion. He no longer feared connection or loss because he understood that life's true value lay in relationships, shared experiences, and the courage to embrace each day fully. The man who had once lived in isolation was now a pillar of the community, respected not only for his skills, but for the strength of his character. As the season changed, Jack and Clara worked together to expand the ranch's capabilities. They planted new fields, renovated barns, and developed a small program to help other ranchers in the region. Their partnership was built on trust, respect, and a shared vision. Through their efforts, Jack found fulfillment in service, in building, and in guiding others. He realized that redemption was not only personal. It was about lifting others, creating opportunities, and sharing the lessons he had learned through hardship and courage. One quiet evening, after a long day of work, Jack and Clara sat on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the hills. The sky was painted in soft hues of pink and orange, reflecting off the creek that wound through the ranch. Jack felt a sense of peace he had never known before. The past, with its pain and losses, no longer haunted him. He had faced danger, confronted fear, and embraced the possibility of change. In that moment, he understood that the whisper that had reached him months ago had been the spark, but his choices, courage, and dedication had been the flame. Clara looked at him with a gentle smile, her eyes reflecting the warmth of the sunset. "You've come a long way, Jack," she said. "The man who feared life is no longer here. You've chosen courage, compassion, and connection. That is true redemption." Jack nodded, feeling a sense of gratitude not just for Clara, but for the journey itself. He understood that redemption was not a destination, but a lifelong commitment to living fully, acting with integrity, and caring for others. In the weeks that followed, Jack continued to build a life that balanced work, relationships, and self-discovery. He spent time with neighbors, mentoring younger ranchers and sharing his knowledge. He helped families in need, repaired damaged properties, and tended to the animals with patience and skill. Each day reinforced his belief that life's challenges were not punishments, but opportunities to grow, connect, and make a difference. As the years passed, the ranch flourished under Jack and Clara's care. Their partnership deepened, rooted in trust, respect, and shared experiences. Jack no longer feared loss or failure, for he understood that life's value lay in the connections we forge, the courage we show, and the choices we make to act with kindness and purpose. The curse that had once defined him was gone, replaced by a life rich with meaning, love, and hope. One evening, as the first stars appeared in the sky, Jack walked to the edge of the property, taking in the landscape that had been both his prison and his sanctuary. The whisper that had first reached him in solitude seemed to echo in the rustle of the grass and the soft call of the night birds. "Your life begins again." Jack smiled, feeling a sense of completeness. He had faced fear, embraced change, and chosen redemption. The man who had once been haunted by isolation and loss was now fully alive, connected to the world and ready for whatever the future held. He turned back to the ranch, where Clara was tending to the animals, her presence steady and comforting. Together they walked through the fields, sharing quiet conversation and laughter. The journey had been long, filled with challenges and moments of doubt, but it had led to a life of purpose, compassion, and connection. Jack understood that redemption was not a single act, but a series of choices made each day with courage and integrity. As the night deepened, Jack and Clara stood on the porch, looking out at the stars. The ranch was quiet, peaceful, and alive with the promise of tomorrow. Jack took a deep breath, feeling the wind on his face and the strength in his heart. He had been tested, he had faced danger and fear, and he had emerged stronger, wiser, and free. The whisper that had reached him long ago had been the beginning, but it was his choices, courage, and love that had completed the journey. And so, under the vast, star-filled sky, Jack knew that he had truly been redeemed. He was no longer the man haunted by the past or defined by fear. He was a cowboy who had chosen courage over retreat, connection over isolation, and love over doubt. His life was no longer bound by the whispers of a curse, but illuminated by the promise of hope, purpose, and the joy of living fully. The ranch, once a place of solitude, had become a home filled with life, laughter, and community. Jack had learned that redemption was not about avoiding mistakes or never feeling pain. It was about facing life with courage, learning from experience, and embracing the chance to make a difference. And as he looked at Clara, standing beside him, Jack knew that the greatest reward of all was the ability to share his life with someone who had believed in him when he could not believe in himself. For the first time in his life, Jack felt truly free. The past no longer held him, the curse no longer defined him, and the future stretched out before him, bright, open, and filled with possibility. His journey of redemption was complete, not as an ending, but as the beginning of a life fully lived, a life of courage, love, and hope that would continue for years to come.